everyone. Good morning. Hope you enjoyed the last panel. As Emily mentioned, I'm Jacquelyn Melinek. I'm a senior crypto reporter at TechCrunch, and I'm here with Daniel, Joachim, Anna, Paige, and Alfred. And all their titles are up there. I was going to give like an actual intro, but Emily already did that, so we'll just get into it. Obviously, the title of this panel is The Decentralized Web, How Much Regulation is Necessary. I feel like, personally, I've been writing a lot about regulation recently. I am based in New York, so it's mainly US focused. But I feel like there's so much to talk about there beyond just like financial markets, but like the technological factors behind regulation, where we see it going. And so to start with everyone, I want to ask, how much regulation do you think is necessary? And what would be the perfect amount that would protect investors and the markets and technology while still promoting that innovation?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, please.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. It's obviously a big question because like the decentralized web is a very broad term. The amount of regulation we've seen so far is mainly related to crypto in a more narrow sense. And this is obviously a very limited view of the world because, as you said, Web3 and the decentralized web is a lot bigger. However, from a regulatory perspective and approach, I think that's the right way to go. And I think most of the part of the decentralized web should actually be unregulated. However, if it comes to crypto in the narrow sense, I think we really do need regulation. And uncertainty in that space is absolutely toxic for innovation. And here we really see like a very stark contrast if we look at different regions. The EU led the way with MiCA, really providing for very clear rules of the road here. Whereas in the US we have a total mess. It's not that there's no guidelines at all. However, there's no clear process in statute, and this is actually what I advocated for recently in Congress, that this gap is closed, that there is really a clear path for a token that once was a security to desecuritized or morph. And I think it's really mandatory for regulators, and it's great that we have Joachim here, for them to understand the tech, because I clearly think the most important thing here is that things should be regulated for what they are and what they do. For example, DOT is a piece of network infrastructure. It's a piece of coordinating software. So it definitely should not be regulated as a financial instrument. And if regulators don't understand like the tech behind, a lot of collateral damage can be done. But I pass on to Joachim now.
Yeah. Thanks very much. And welcome to everybody here also from my side. Regulation always comes last. I mean, we have made clear statements at the European level already at very early stages of blockchain that we support the technology. We see the benefits that go way beyond technology as such. Blockchain is a societal revolution. Blockchain is something that puts decentralization first, that puts empowerment bottom up first. And we are not only saying that, we have demonstrated that already, I would say, 8 years ago, when we have declared that blockchain is an innovation priority for Europe for the next decades to come in every policy field. That's the first time ever in the history of the European Union that we have made any such statement about the technology. And MiCA, we will come to that, is only a very, very small part of that. There are many other activities as such. The problem is twofold. First of all, when you create a business, when you try to scale, you are already faced with a lot of regulation that is out there. And this regulation hasn't been made for you. So in a way, we have to deal with that, and that is our main activity, that we need to change existing regulation to empower the startups that are in the space to develop and scale, because otherwise you would have silly bureaucratic things like putting things on paper and sending and whatever you have out there, which is just not fit for the technology. And that applies to most of financial, but also to the real economy regulation. The second thing is, if you have zero regulation whatsoever, as an entrepreneur, you're very often in a difficult position, Because if, for example, you accept any resources from people and you don't have the status as a business person, these people have the right for 2 weeks to retract whatever they've invested or given you, and that puts you in a much more dangerous position in terms of liability than you would have if you were an entrepreneur. This being said, the approach towards regulation that we take is risk-based. And one of the fundamental messages that we always see is that the more decentralized you are, the less risk you pose to society and to everyone out there. The risk is in the centralized silos. And we've seen that in the autumn of 2008. That's what I call the Lehman Bitcoin moment. You had the collapse of Lehman Brothers as the deepest point of the financial crisis, where all the risk is in the centralized silos, and 6 weeks later you get the Bitcoin white paper. And this really exemplifies where the problem is and where the solution is. Blockchain is the solution. And therefore, we have waited very, very long, over 10 years, until we came with the first piece of regulation. And this is only, as said, a very narrow space. But there is a responsibility for everyone in the space to demonstrate to everyone out there, not only to us, the benefits of what you're doing, because you're living on this planet, you're not living in another solar system, and therefore you're using resources, you are having external effects that might be created, and therefore there's a responsibility for everyone to engage.
Thank you. As you have heard, informed regulators are very supportive of the benefits of decentralized technology, and just as critical as Polkadot community is of some misuse of blockchain and calling a project blockchain-based when in reality you're not benefiting from the empowering, the authenticating, decentralized governance that we all want to see in the space. So the underlying premise of good governance is that you have to be technology neutral. Blockchain should never be regulated, certain applications should be. For the same reason, we don't talk about regulating Python. We talk about regulating certain AI applications because we want to protect how our data is accessed and used by someone else. Those are the rights that we all want protected. And there is a fine balance between preferring anonymity but wanting accountability. And that's where we are. And it's about education. And we can spend all day today criticizing Brussels and bureaucracy. But if you read a resolution that the Parliament adopted in October 2018, which is years ago in blockchain years, they list there all the benefits of blockchain, and they urge the Commission and the member states to get educated, to upgrade the technical skills of citizens in decentralized technology, and to invest in research. And since then, EU has invested millions to support different research projects, and so have some member states. And EnergyWeb is working with the German government, for example, and so is KILT and some other projects in the Polkadot space. Particularly for us, it's the area of decentralized IDs for energy assets, because we would all like our energy assets to have the interoperability and not be in a vendor lock-in. So if you have an electric vehicle, you want your battery to participate to offer storage, to offer capacity to your local market. You don't want the owner of the car to prevent that for you because they want to derive another benefit or not give it to you. So this is the type of projects where blockchain can intervene and support the rights that regulators want to protect.
I guess we're going down the line. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today. It's, of course, a very big question. And I think coming at it from a more human rights and tech policy perspective, through my work at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, it's slightly redundant to answer how much regulation is necessary on a sliding scale. But I think from our perspective, the way we're looking at this is it's super important to regulate behaviors rather than their technologies. If we look at Web 2 compared to Web 3, and take the example of social media and different service platforms there, no regulation on certain social sites can lead to kind of a cesspit of hatred and harassment and doxing and all the like. But too much regulation can lead to censorship and a restriction of freedom of speech and different fundamental freedoms. And so if we're looking at the digital rights perspective here, it's really important that we continue to regulate alongside experts. We don't do this in a vacuum, and we continue to ensure that the benefits of decentralized web are enhanced for all, and that we're not siloing the development of decentralization through regulation for only a specific community of individuals.
Yeah, so the question, how much regulation is really broad, of course. I would add, complementing to what was said already from maybe a more academic perspective, that we don't really know yet. It's an ongoing process, of course, but there are certain points that I would like to point out as well. We certainly shouldn't have a regulation that attacks the very core of the technology, that sort of hinders the innovative potential of blockchain, DLT, and Web3, and the whole infrastructure. I'm not really scared that this will happen. I don't see any indication of that. I think lawmakers, all the blockchain stakeholders, all the people in the field are very aware that this ecosystem needs to thrive and grow. But nevertheless, I assume that there will be a push for more regulatory action in the future, besides the aspects that we already mentioned, so in crypto assets. And there, I think transparency is very important. Of course, transparency is just a huge buzzword, but what I mean here is that we should be more aware, or we should be able to see what's actually under the hood. So if a service is a decentralized autonomous organization, we should know that. When we interact with a product that is really blockchain-based, it would make sense to know that, because it could also be just a database in a fancy dress-up, right? So, and being more transparent about the things that are under the hood would also help regulators. It would maybe prevent them from going in and regulating across the board and threatening the technology as a whole. So I think that's very important. And last point I want to make, regulation can also be very beneficial for the blockchain ecosystem. It was said already, it can solve very specific issues, very specific problems. It can provide more legal certainty in specific fields, but that's not the broad strokes. That's just like tuning little things, and there are plenty of examples for that.
Yeah, going off of that, Alfred, I feel like regulation is something that a lot of people are afraid of, but a lot of people want to embrace as well. Going to Joachim on looking at MiCA and the EU's actions there, I feel like that's kind of been praised, generally speaking, across the board for providing like a framework for almost everything in crypto assets. I think it's excluding like NFTs and maybe a few other things. But looking at Europe and what the EU has done there with MiCA, what do you think is something they're getting right there? And then also, what can be the consequence of this when other countries may not have what the EU has now in terms of this act?
I think if you start to give an answer to that, you need to look back into history. Then you start at least 2,500 years ago. This continent has ever been a decentralized place. People have been working together locally. They've created all sorts of networks throughout history, and that's specifically what this technology also allows. MiCA is not the first regulation in the crypto space. I would at least go back to the General Data Protection Regulation. I know that a lot of people don't really like that, but the important thing is, how do we see the world? We see the world that everything that you create, also your data, are your possession. And there's more than that. It's not only your possession, and you should have the right to govern that, to give access to your data or not, but you as an individual are at the same moment part of a lot of different collectives. As an individual without a collective, you are nothing. So you engage with collectives, it's your families, it's your friends, it's your job, it's whatever you do, and you create data streams, you create interaction as a part of the collective. So in terms of identity, for example, you should have disposable different identities depending on your context. That's the starting point. On that, we built the whole approach that we have in crypto on blockchain, because the technology enables the local trust creation to scale to the global level. That's the really new thing that we all know about that, which is really cool. I wouldn't say that we want the world to do what Europe does. This idea that I'm just discussing is not per se a European idea. You also find it in other parts of the world. It's really the idea, as I said, of decentralization of bottom up. In my opinion, we have 3 different business models for governance in the world. We have the top-down state approach that we see in a number of big countries, no names here, which is basically totalitarianism. We see that privatized through the big techs, that in my opinion is also totalitarianism, because they don't care about you, they just want your data and do with that what you want. And then you have the people that really believe in the decentralization. And MiCA is part of that. There is a misconception that MiCA is mainly about stablecoins, but actually we designed MiCA way before Libra. And the reason is that we wanted to have some very liberal, lowly regulated space within the financial regulation domain, below what we have on financial instruments, to enable that. And I just give you one example. If you are a startup, if you build a utility token that you want to scale and launch, you basically send a white paper to one national regulator, and then you can already launch your business, and you get a passport within 30 countries, not only in the EU, but also 3 associated countries. And the burden of proof is reversed to the regulator to show you that you have done something wrong. This is an absolute revolution in the field of finance. We have never had in the field of finance any such rule, which of course then has been complemented by the approach towards stablecoins. But on stablecoins as well, governments told us very clearly when Libra came, and that is in the open domain, I can discuss it, you need to prohibit everything. And we have prohibited nothing. But we think that when you come with stablecoins to Europe, there are a couple of basic rules in terms of governance that you should follow. This is about reserves. This is about, let's say, certain requirements as regards the management board. This is about the separation of assets in specific ways, etc. This for me is common sense. Nothing is prohibited, but the rules are very clear of what you can do and what you can't do. And I'm far away from saying that this is optimal. It's one thing to have a regulation. The really big problem will come now with the technical standards to implement that at national level and see that we have here a coherent space. And furthermore, to extend it probably to the decentralized space. Because what we have done so far is the easy part. Financial regulation, MiCA, is the extremely easy part. But try to get the notion of really collective liability, of really collective entrepreneurial action from a civil law perspective, from the perspective also of protecting privacy, into the regulatory field. And this is a challenge that we haven't seen for a couple of 100 years. And this is where we currently stand. So MiCA is nice. MiCA is good because it sets certain rules, and a lot of people outside are already following us. But if we are here sitting to celebrate anything, we are in the wrong room, because basically we've done one job, and good morning, the next 100 jobs are ahead of us.
All right. Daniel, I know you are based in Europe, but you recently testified before the US Congress. And as someone who is based in America, I follow the whole regulatory situation very closely there. How do you think the US Securities and Exchange Commission situation with Binance, Coinbase, all the other companies they are kind of cracking down on is affecting regulation globally? And I feel like I know the answer to this, but do you think the US is getting this right?
Well, these actions certainly pulled down the market, which was not a nice thing, and no one could actually defend themselves against this. Ultimately, I think that these legal actions will help the market to mature. Some projects will stay, some will disappear, some will join. What you can take for granted is that if you are actually confronted with legal actions, it's not only your legal department being very busy for quite some time. It's not really that this situation would not have been foreseeable. Let's face it. I mean, if you sell a token to be distributed in the future for fundraising purposes, it's quite likely that you qualify as a security. So no one can be really surprised about this. At least it's very clear that this would be the take of the SEC. So when the Web3 Foundation issued the DOT token, there was a relatively simple choice to be taken or made at the point. Throw your resources behind building great and unstoppable tech and try to comply with the framework which is out there, even if it's sort of incomplete and leaves way for interpretation, or B, prepare for litigation, because it was clear that the hammer would come down at some point, and obviously it did. And most of you will have followed that to date, DOT has not been classified by anyone as being still a security. And I think it's fair and it's okay to celebrate this as a success directly following from the great work that's been done by many people over many years, but I think it's also important to stay humble and focused, meaning stay on a compliant path, keep on working with regulators, showcase our experiences and help regulators shape a legislative framework that's actually fit for purpose. And as a last point, what Joachim referred to is this utility token. That's really a game changer. And I would contradict that it was a EU or European invention. The Swiss actually put out that framework much before that. But this really provided for the legal security that is needed for projects like Polkadot to thrive and build.
I'm glad you brought up the fact that Polkadot has not been mentioned, because I have a question for you, Anna and Paige, you all work for Web3 focused companies. How do you kind of navigate the current landscape, and where do you find comfort or challenges given the fact that there really isn't true, clear guidelines across like a global landscape right now?
Yes, thank you for that question. As you know, Energy Web has recently announced to be joining the Polkadot community with the parachain. This is for us just another step. As many are aware, we have been working in this space for a long time and are proud to have supported the POA consensus mechanism and even WASM and some other features that form the basis for later developments so we were around for a while. We could have exploited the ICO opportunity to raise significantly more than we have as Energy Web. We did not conduct an ICO. It was not regulated. It would not have been illegal at the time, but we thought it was not the right thing to do because it was not the right way to raise funds and to sufficiently inform investors and do everything that you need to do responsibly. And therefore, we did not do that. So we forwent an opportunity to raise more funds and instead reached out to what for us would be the utility stakeholders, the energy companies, and we there went for diversity. So companies from different parts of the globe, from Australia to Latin America to Japan, Europe, obviously. And we also included startups because we wanted the disruptors in the space and not just the incumbents. And that was the approach we took. So that was to start what we did. In the energy space, like in any other industry, some of the activities are regulated and some are not. So if you're improving your processes, like predictive maintenance for your power plant, or if you are improving your value chain management, you don't need to check regulation because these type of activities are not regulated. What is regulated is energy trading. And then to take my other hat as Grid Singularity, we took on the arguably most difficult task in the energy blockchain space, which is to enable peer-to-peer trading. To this day, we cannot do that legally, not because it's illegal, but because the barriers are so high for individual households to participate. And what we're doing then is we're working with regulators and working in research innovation projects where we can work in so-called test beds, pilot sites, because we need to convince the regulator that this is a safe way for a person to have their energy supplied securely, that they will, and so forth. Another application that is already out there that I was proud to read in the FT on one Saturday morning even, is the Flex Alert app that Energy Web helped build and bring to life. So in California, this is an app that prevented blackouts this past summer. It is blockchain-based. It is not about trading, it's just about a safe way to be informed and to participate and change how you behave to support the grid market, the grid system. And if you read the article, you will even learn the name of the app, but the article will not say that behind this app there is blockchain. And my first reaction was that I was upset they didn't mention it. And my second reaction was, no, that's actually a good thing. It means that we're evolving. Because why would you need to know how a certain app on your phone works and what type of programming tools it uses? So for many of the apps in the energy sector, blockchain is already there, it's present, it's being used, it's mainstream. For some others, where the regulation needs to change not as to how blockchain is treated, but about how that particular activity is done, like trading, we're still waiting and it takes time. It is a very slow and frustrating process for innovators, but for many other fields, you can already apply today as we are.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think just from a privacy perspective and engaging on this, what we're really looking at the Electronic Frontier Foundation are the concerns of who's collecting, when blockchain is being used, and what's the exchange of transparency for privacy, who's collecting the data, what data is being collected, where that's going, what public accountability mechanisms are in place to ensure that when data is being collected, used, and sold, users know that and they are aware of what is happening there. I think fundamentally, of course, one of the best benefits of decentralization, as everybody on this panel has mentioned so far, is the ability to innovate and be creative and give users that choice, give users the ability to make informed decisions about where they want to dedicate their time and energy, their money, their resources, and ultimately where they want to engage. And it's great that there are more options, and there's a mass proliferation, of course, of options for consumers and for users of different services. But I think, fundamentally, what we want to ensure is that that's available for everybody. And one thing that's perhaps to mention, to add to this conversation, is that there are lots of communities that would love to engage, and you mentioned that blockchain is not being sometimes referred to, and I think there's probably a benefit there because it can be such an isolating concern. It's like, what is blockchain? What is Web3? I don't know what this means. How do I engage? Like, what do I download? Like, what app do I start with? And beyond that, these services can be really, really important. I was speaking with some communities of gender-based violence, sex worker communities, and how they can really benefit from the decentralized web. And it's really important that when we have these conversations, we bring those people in, and we ensure that we are filling the vacuum of language literacy, essentially, making sure that when we create these services and have these articles like the one that you mentioned, Anna, it's being communicated beyond the vacuum of the kind of the decentralized experts. And I think most people in here probably know everything or a lot about decentralization and blockchain, but if we went out into the street, I'm not sure how much that would translate. And so really making sure that when we have these conversations, we're also bringing in those voices that could really benefit from these services. And I think, if we pick up on what's being mentioned today, we're looking at green energy, we're looking at academic benefits, we're looking at so many potential enhancers of individual life. I guess in theory you could plug ChatGPT into content moderation if you wanted to. Not sure that would be the best use of anybody's time, but being able to do that is so beneficial for individuals. And so making sure that when we continue to have these conversations, we really are bridging that gap and ensuring at the same time the regulation doesn't hinder innovation and competition. And that's global, So just to pick up, it's like I really appreciate what Joachim was saying about not making Europe and the Brussels bubble something that we want to replicate around the world, because different contexts deserve different regulations that are really specific to those climates. And it's important that we don't just take Europe as the chief developers and regulators and then, essentially copy and paste that around the world.
Yeah, thank you, Paige. I also want to ask Joachim and Alfred this too, as people who may not work directly at Web3 companies, but you look at the space a lot, how do you kind of see the regulatory global landscape impacting markets and businesses from your perspective?
Well, what I observe is, you said it already, Joachim, we have now looking from a European perspective, we have now this MiCA regulation just governing a very small fraction of the whole technology space. And what is interesting is, to kind of look ahead at where this regulatory push that I kind of anticipate to come, where this might come in. What are the features of the technology that could lead to more regulation in specific areas. The transparency I already mentioned, but there's also other aspects like interoperability, something that's really dear to the Polkadot community. But I mean, it might not be that high of a priority everywhere. So that could be one starting point where regulators could come in and say, we want to, if we want to make this ecosystem thrive, then this is something we look for. We have to make sure that there is interoperability. Another thing, of course, data protection, data security, privacy, but also other stuff, of course, like energy consumption and sustainability. I mean, I think these are the issues. And last but not least, accountability. And that's probably the most tricky part of it, because, lawmakers and lawyers especially, they always want to attribute liability somewhere, right? So somebody has to be in charge, and here, we're faced with, as you said, not a novel concept, but it could, it can be in its extreme form. It can be very challenging to apply that standard concept that somebody has to be liable if something messes up. And here again, I think transparency could be a very good starting point, right? If we know that we have a fully decentralized setting, then maybe we can take a step back on liability, because if if people know what they're getting themselves into, negatively put, then maybe that's not as strong of an issue. But here, I think we're at the very beginning of the discussion.
Perhaps to add to that, because the question is indeed, on the one hand side, the true decentralization, on the other hand side, what about global harmonization? I get that question very often of, would we like global harmonization of the rules? I usually love to reply, that's like, do you want snow for Christmas? We probably want snow for Christmas, but we won't get it. So it's nice to have in a way, but this world is to a large extent falling apart. We see that. And this is falling apart from the top down. So the only real answer to that is to create a decentralized space where we have communities that can, on the one hand side, make meaningful contributions, and on the other hand side, cannot be easily caught by those who want to catch them. And this I find extremely important in terms of democratization and inclusion, because that's where the true democratic potential lies. It's not by following orders by others, but by following your preferences and doing stuff. And this is where the decentralization indeed comes in as a concept. And therefore, I would say that we are very far away from true decentralization. We have it with development of even the most decentralized cryptocurrencies. At the outset, there is an element of centralization, and then you have to let loose, like with smart contracts or like with the Bitcoin white paper or with other things. Even if you think very philosophical on the notion about God or whatever is out there, I find it extremely difficult to understand how something can exist without something having been planned or designed in advance. That's beyond my understanding. So to a large extent, decentralization is a fiction, but it is an extremely important fiction to have, because it's a sort of blueprint of a better thing. I would like to see a world where people are well informed, enter a space and live with the consequences. If you do something, if you invest in something, if you engage in an activity and you want to reap the opportunities, but the moment that it gets wrong, you call your prime minister, I think there's a mental issue with you, not with the technology or with the business model as such. But we are not used to doing that any longer, because we have been living for the last 200-300 years with a world that is full of intermediaries that take decisions for you. And normal people out there, unfortunately, are not in a position any longer to really take risks for their own resources, for their own money, for their own way of how they design their life. And this is the true educational force and the opportunities that I think are created by the decentralized space. But last remark on this, you are, as said, unfortunately not living on your own planet. If you were to go now to politicians and ask for support and ask for a couple of billions to launch the space, they wouldn't give you anything. But let's say if there comes an asteroid from outside, and the only chance that to prevent the disaster is to have you design a rocket system to kill off that asteroid, you would have support and the billions immediately. What I'm saying with that is you need to prove the utility. You need to make visible why you do that stuff, for whom the stuff is and what the benefits are. And that is unfortunately mostly not financial. If you start an NFT discussion with someone saying that I launch an NFT because I want to be stinking rich with some nonsense that I put out there, it's not the best storyline if you want to have support. But if you come with the energy, if you come with the inclusion, with the privacy, if you come with all the places in the world that either don't have a legacy system or a messed up legacy system and create benefits for real people, then you grab the attention. And this is, I would say, the big thing that is now in the room. The world is opening more and more to opportunities simply because it is getting messed up more and more. But we want you to engage with everyone who takes decision very proactively. And a very good example is this discussion on the Data Act, where yesterday there was the agreement finally on the European Parliament, where we will see what that has to be delivered. We had an open letter signed by 20 associations. Everyone in the blockchain community came together to discuss smart contracts and the Data Act. Even the crowdfunders came, a lot of communities came. That is the way forward. Be assertive, work together. You are the good ones, but you need to make your voice heard in a way that politicians understand. And that is not me. I understand that. My colleagues in the Commission understand that. But 99% of the politicians out there do not understand you. And you have to target these if you want to have good rules.
You're popular with the crowd. All right. I think that last bit you touched on is almost advice in a way. And I want to wrap things up by asking everyone, one, for people in the audience, builders, developers, founders, active market participants, they kind of want advice on where to go from here, especially when the landscape is not that clear for everyone. So one, I would love to hear if any of you have any advice that you could share. And then two, if you have a crystal ball, where do you see crypto regulation going in the future? And what timeline?
Again, super difficult questions.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, probably thinking about these is core of my job, and I spend a lot of time thinking about exactly this. I'm normally a bit private about like the resolutions because I don't necessarily want to share everything with regulators to give them ideas what they actually could regulate. And it's also one word about the EU. I would not be all praise only, right? Like, for example, the AI Act is not an example where I would say that was the greatest approach, because that was not wait and see and take a risk-based approach. It was very much based on that precautionary principle that is known in the EU, but not in many other countries. What I would say, though, is, and some people touch upon this, DAOs are a very big topic, and since we're at Polkadot Decoded, and Polkadot is arguably the largest DAO out there, we need to find a way how DAOs can actually participate in in legal life. Find a way how a DAO can contract with other entities. Need to get like these liability questions under control. Don't want to scare anyone here. Don't want to make this a liability question or discussion. But dealing with DAOs per default as general partnerships or unincorporated associations coming with joint liability, etc., that's certainly not the way forward. And like, I'm not giving ideas to regulators, they're already thinking about this, but that's really a crucial thing we need to tackle and really need to find something, because as Joachim said, like, DAOs are a chance to like reinvent like the way we cooperate, the way we create and recreate democracy, and that needs like fit legal foundations that we can actually work with.
I would say that we face very difficult 3 to 4 years ahead, because a lot of people are fighting against what is happening, and they will get their way to a certain extent. We will have certain platforms collapsing, we will have difficulties in the space, but in 15, 20 years, we will be absolutely there. And the simple reason is, and we've seen that in history in so many times, the old ones die and the young ones come in. Those that prevent will die, and those that have grown up with all these ideas will simply shape their own rules. That is a given, and we don't need to discuss that. That is also why we are building already these huge infrastructures and stuff, because we know what is coming. What is to be done? Indeed, I think DAOs are the way forward. I'm currently launching a study on giving a legal context for DAOs in Europe. I think that's a very important discussion to have as a sort of online cooperatives. But whenever you do these things, as said, discuss it with the regulators, discuss it with the politicians, even if you find it disturbing at the beginning. But it is extremely important to have the dialogue. Most people out there, I can definitely tell you, want to support you, but do not know how, and do not know if they really dare to support you. So the more you engage with them, the better it is for you.
One of the Twitter questions was, should I care if code is law, right? You know, the answer is that the danger of uninformed regulators is stifling innovation, slowing down innovation. So in many ways, many of us are lucky to operate in Europe and hoping that more advanced European regulators will talk to their peers elsewhere in the world. Although, you know, in energy space, Australia is probably a pioneer in decentralizing energy applications. So there are other leaders in different areas. Alfred mentioned interoperability. Half of time I spend talking to regulators is not explaining how blockchain works anymore. It's about interoperability. It's about open source development, advocating that if public funds are being spent for research, open source innovation should be given a preference. And they're listening and changing how they're supporting different innovation projects. So it's not always fun. But we have to talk, we have to interact, we have to listen as well, get the feedback. If you're a small company, obviously you will not have the resources for this. It's the larger companies, the leaders that will take the brunt of this, like the Web3 Foundation or in the privacy space, what Paige is doing. But if you are a disruptor and building something that needs a regulator change, that you need to leverage some other associations. So as Grid Singularity's Energy Web, we, for example, work with Smartan. And these are flexibility innovators in the energy space, not all using blockchain, but they are disrupting the way services are provided and empowering the citizen to be a much more active participant in the energy market. So we leverage. This is what we do. We all have to follow and be informed, and some of us interact even more closely. And we do see results, and we see how some of the more informed regulators, like a great example we have here today, are understanding and pushing for innovation in the space.
Yeah, just to add to all of these points and take kind of jump out and take the perspective of decentralization and Web3 in general. We want more. I think it's great. We can see so many benefits. You know, if we just to pick up on what's been mentioned, if we look at Reddit and pre-blackout, the way that moderation was done there is such a utopia. It's people that really care about certain issues coming together and moderating. And of pre the last 2 weeks of developments on that site. But I think if we take that perspective, it really underpins open source developments and decentralization in general, which is that together we can all make this a better place and taking it away from one sole agent. But I think there are many concerns that we have at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And whilst we love interoperability, we want to make sure that data is not being shared. If you know, zooming out to a different example, we love interoperability, but what we don't want is personal data being shared between law enforcement across different jurisdictions. We want competition, but we want it to be for the benefit of everybody. We don't want this to be something that can only benefit a few individuals. And looking at how content moderation works, you know, we know it doesn't work at scale. We want to make sure that people are invested and people have a role to play. And so, you know, keep innovating, keep developing. But what we do want is regulation of behaviors, and rather than the technology itself. Just because something is decentralized doesn't mean we don't have bad actors. It doesn't become it's not outside the vacuum of bad behavior. You know, the taking of data. You know, it was mentioned earlier that the US doesn't have federal data privacy legislation, which means that data can be really easily collected, sold, shared, and used by parties that we have no idea about. That's very detrimental to centralized and decentralized services. And so when we look at this, I think we need to make sure that the same considerations we have on centralized web are being concerned in the decentralized world as well, and that we're not just taking this as an opportunity to innovate without any control and consideration of people's speech and privacy, but we're really putting that at the forefront of any new developments.
I really think we have a huge potential of, you know, this whole Web3 ecosystem with regards to very specific issues. And I think I would encourage everyone to, to help solving these specific problems with us and also with regulators. For example, data use is, Web2 data use is basically messed up, right? We don't need to go into the details, don't have time anyway. But does Web3 solve all these problems? Probably not, right? But at least we should make the most of it. We should use it as much as possible. And here, things like self-sovereign identities come in, where you can really manage specific attributes of your personal data. But me as an academic, I don't really know how this works. So, I need to interact with the community to understand, and then everybody needs to interact with lawmakers to understand how that works. And this is just one of many examples. Another one is copyright. Web2 also broke the copyright system, basically. If you're a creator and you put something online, that's the very moment you lose control over your artwork, basically. Again, we have tools that have the potential to get controls back to creators, but how do I know that something is really the original work of an author? Do we have technical means to ensure that? I doubt it. And if we don't, then we have to find a dialogue with authorities that have been doing this for a long time, patent and trademark offices, copyright offices, for example, how we could integrate them into the whole ecosystem, and if that works, or if it doesn't work, then what rules we need here. And I think this is, there's lots of room for input from the community. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about here. Thank you to our panelists, Daniel, Joachim, Anna, Paige, and Alfred for sharing all your insights, and thank you to everyone for listening in.